Hello, everyone. I'm Garrett Womble, and thank you for joining. Today's presentation and discussion by PRAXIS3 Principal Brian Tanner will be joined by Jeremy Kahm. This is the fourth part of our six-part webinar series on the future of research libraries. Jeremy graduated magna cum laude with a Master and Bachelor of Architecture from the Catholic University of America. He is based in BNIM's Kansas City office, where he is an associate principal and served as BNIM's project manager for the Georgia Tech project. We appreciate the opportunity to answer any questions you may have following today's discussion. Those questions can be submitted throughout the presentation by using the dialog box on the right-hand side of your screen. With that, I'll turn it over to Brian and Jeremy to get us started.
Thanks, Garrett, and thank you all for being here today, and especially a big thanks to Jeremy. It's really a thrill to be working with you again after a little bit of time not doing so. We have a really cool presentation today, so I'm going to get right to it. We're going to be talking about the library as breaking with perhaps some of the stereotypes of it being such a quiet place. So what we're going to do today, after some brief introductions, we're going to talk about those kind of stereotypes and how they're maybe a little different today. We're going to talk about the history of how they got to be that way. And then we're going to use the Georgia Tech library that Jeremy and I just finished kind of as a case study to do it, and then a little time for discussion at the end. Credit where credit is due. This is a state project, so the owner is the Georgia Board of Regents and GSFIC, which is to say that the citizens of Georgia are the owners. The using agency was Georgia Tech, and specifically the Georgia Tech Library. The architecture team was led by BNIM with PRAXIS3, and Jeremy and I are representing those two teams in full color today. And then visioning was done by Bright Spot Strategies, who helped the library sort of articulate a vision for a few program areas that will show up in today's conversation. Again, there's Jeremy Kahm, Brian Tanner. We were both project managers. Jeremy was the sort of kind of lead PM for the project, and he and I worked together for more than 6 years. So welcome, Jeremy.
Thank you.
So let's get at it. Why do we think libraries are supposed to be so quiet? There are some stereotypes about librarians, to be sure, about being sort of shushing scolds, and there's some truth in the fact that it attracts probably bookish people or perhaps more introspective people to become librarians. But it's also the case that by the early 20th century, many librarians felt that their real occupation or their real responsibility was to the collection and managing the collection, and that the patrons and their noise and activity sometimes got in the way. It wasn't always like this. Throughout history, and the ancient libraries of Alexandria were much more active places. I know, Jeremy, this is something we talked about a lot during programming.
We did, yeah. Amit brought it up, I think, first, and it might have even been pre-interview that he mentioned the Alexandria Library as a sort of model for what they were envisioning for Georgia Tech.
Absolutely. It was a Greek library, obviously, based on the peripatetic school, which literally means walking and talking. So this was all about interaction and activity, not just a place to store books, but a place to actually collaborate and execute scholarship in real time and space. For the Romans, they had a different type of library. It's bilingual, so it'd be Greek on one side and Latin on the other, but you see the big space in the middle that would have been a place for collaboration. By the time we get to the late 19th, early 20th century, maybe the paradigmatic, quiet, majestic reading room space is the reading room at the British Library, which was part of the British Museum. The collection around the outside, the ring of seats in the reading room, and then at the center, in the panopticon position of ultimate control, sits the librarian, keeping everybody kind of at bay. This was kind of a paradigmatic model for that form of library. Beautiful space, though. Mm. The developments by Panizzi, who was the kind of the person responsible for the British Library, and then Dewey, who was responsible for one way of using call numbers and organizing the collection, really led to this sort of bureaucratization of the librarian's job, and to the point that even we had closed stacks with certain libraries, like the one at the New York City Public Library, where the stacks are closed and the librarians go to the stacks and bring the stuff out to the patrons. So let's talk about the Georgia Tech Library. Jeremy, I know this is an image that you remember very well. You want to explain what this is trying to say?
Right. When we talk about renovating existing buildings, and there are two of them here, the third being the Clough Commons on the left, which was a building done by BCJ and finished, I think, around, I don't know, 2010, something like that. Mm-hmm. And then Price Gilbert in the center, Crossland Tower on the right-hand side. So we look at these existing buildings and kind of have to read them a little bit and understand how you might organize new space in existing buildings. In the case of these, they have some verticality to them, and we thought that there is this need for quiet space that the students repeatedly referred to wanting in the renewed library, but then also a need for active space. And so how do we organize that? And we did it in a vertical way, so that active floors are on the lowest levels of the building, and it got it kind of incrementally quieter as you moved up, to the point where on the 7th floor of Crossland Tower, it is a very quiet space, very meditative, with a great view of downtown Atlanta.
Yeah, we've got some images of that to look at. So this ground level Jeremy was just talking about really becomes the hub of the library. We're going to talk a lot about that in a little while. But this, in effect, the two buildings that formed the traditional part of the library, the Crossland Tower, which was the tall one, Price Gilbert, which was the kind of middle building there, were separated on this level. And this level was effectively the basement in the old configuration. And our design transforms this into a very active hub. And we'll talk about that more later. The library also wanted to completely reinvent the idea of how they delivered services, kind of based on more of a retail or Apple store model. That was a big program driver too, wasn't it, Jeremy?
Yeah, that's right. Apple Store was often referred to as a service model where you don't have a desk that somebody hides behind or that separates a patron from the person who's providing the service. They come out to meet you. They meet you where you are and take you where you want to go. That was kind of the service model they were investigating.
Yeah, for sure. And the image on the left there is some role playing we were doing, and kind of testing out how that sort of interactive roving librarian model would go. Those are actual Georgia Tech librarians in the picture. Okay, Jeremy, I know you are familiar with this image. You wanna tell us what's going on here?
Oh, sure. So we have these pairs of images that we used again and again when presenting to the client and other groups that talk about the transformation of these buildings from a place that is a vessel that houses books to a place that's turned inside out. It's no longer inward oriented and about protection. It's externally oriented and about people. So there are very literal ways that we tried to make that happen. The introduction of glass and the introduction of volumes of space rather than volumes of books.
Yeah, that's well said. Which is not to say that it's not, as Jeremy mentioned when we were looking at the vertical diagram, it's not to say that it's all about collaboration. We need both quiet spaces and collaboration spaces. So So really, it's not that the library isn't a quiet place. It's just that it's not only that. It's actually a whole spectrum of things, and we'll look at ways in which the design kind of talks about those kinds of things. So the library hub, we mentioned that this ground floor has become a very active kind of main level of the library in what used to be more like a basement. And one of the main sort of features of that is what we call the superhighway. Why did you tell us a little bit about that term, Jeremy? We're not hearing you, Jeremy.
I'm sorry, you froze for a second.
Okay, no, just saying the superhighway idea was a pretty early driving concept for the design.
It was, and I remember we were looking at the floor levels one day, and Clough is an existing building, these are existing buildings, and we were starting to put the pieces together in our head and said, oh my gosh, if you enter off of Bobby Dodd Way, you can get all the way to the north side of Tech Green without ever going outside. You can navigate that through these buildings. And when we presented that to Georgia Tech, you could see the lights turn on, and they're like, oh wow, this is a real opportunity for a space that is, as you said, absolutely forgotten.
Yeah, it was good from an accessibility standpoint. It was good from a connectivity standpoint, and it also created a way to sort of further separate active and quiet areas in the library. So it was a move that worked on lots of different levels. So one of the first stops is one enters, as Jeremy said, from that Bobby Dodd Way entrance on the left, which is the east side, is Culture Creator, which is a seating riser, which is a social space, a gathering space, kind of a landmark sort of location meeting place in the library. These wood panels are designed to be removed, and eventually, if once the philanthropy process is completed, with some digitally enhanced wood veneer panels that have embedded LED capabilities to use programmed information, which we're excited about hopefully seeing someday. Also, the library has its own cafe, and they really didn't want to. They didn't want to just bring in a Starbucks and put it inside the library, but actually have a space that was integrated as a library space. Don't you agree with that, Jeremy? We're having some connectivity problems still. The idea for this cafe, though, is that it would really be part of the library. So we're using the same wood materials that were used in other areas of the library, and we've integrated a sort of independent vendor to work in the library space. That's Sideways. The Sideways name is an interesting story. It's named after a dog that was a mascot for some fraternity or something in the early part of the 20th century. It was a three-legged dog that walked kind of funny, and they called him Sideways. That's who it's named after. We also have a screen porch, which is a truly unique space on the campus, an indoor-outdoor space, and it was kind of fun to integrate a space like that. Jeremy, you want to talk about that?
Well, the screen porch, I think, wasn't always a screen porch. It was at one time enclosed space. We thought we needed it for the program, but in the evolution of the project, there was this idea, and it was becoming quite popular in Atlanta specifically. Coffee shops like the Dancing Goats have these screen porch areas where you can sort of take in the environment to the outside while still being under protection. And it's just a really neat kind of an opportunity area that that kind of bridges inside and outside on this project.
Yeah, the students were very excited. The student advisors we had working with us were excited about opportunities for indoor and outdoor experiences, and this was one of the outgrowths of that. This kind of came directly from the students, this idea to have this category of space. There's a picture of it next to this monumental stair that was added, this nice screen porch underneath this outdoor terrace. And then the interactive zone kind of happens at the crossroads, and this is really a heavy traffic area and would include some interactive media installations, again, after the philanthropic exercises are completed, which will have virtual browsing, we'll have showcasing of scholarship on campus, a way for the library to communicate with patrons, and a way for patrons to present, or for students to present capstone projects and things like that. It's a performance space, an informational space that's really interactive in a lot of different senses. And then at the end of the last stop on the superhighway is the info desk and library store. And it really was nice to be able to use, Jeremy, this whole sort of ground level space overlooking the Grove as the home for the info desk library store.
And this is the part of the program that we were modeling after the Apple store in terms of its interactivity, and it's organized. Sorry.
Yeah, you're good. Yeah, keep going.
Okay, it's organized. We had talked about a shallow end of the store and a deep end of the store. So people come here for different reasons. They want to know where the bathroom is, or they also want to research some 16th century historian. And so serving those different needs are kind of front end services where it's just transactional at a desk. And then you see in the rear of this image some enclosed rooms for 1 or 2 or 3 people to really do some intensive librarian directed or librarian facilitated research.
Yeah. So as you progress deeper into the info desk area, you're getting more and more and more specialized library services. It's really interesting. It almost allows the patron to opt in the way that a retail patron can decide how much they want to engage with sales staff. Sales is a dirty word with librarians, but it's something that we actually tried to use in a real meaningful way in this project, and in a way that would be helpful and not somehow sully the idea of what librarians do. All right. So looking at reading rooms, Price Gilbert building, one of the mantras, Jeremy, we used on this project, and it's one that Steve McDowell definitely stressed throughout, was long life, loose fit. And one of the things we found in the existing Price Gilbert architecture was that these two-story reading rooms overlooked by these balconies and other areas was already a long life, loose fit space. It felt comfortable to be in it. It was useful. It was good in 1953, and it's good in 2020. It's a good category of space. So we were looking for ways to leverage that space. And I remember you developing these diagrams. You want to talk a little bit about what these mean to you?
Sure. So drawing from what Brian just said about these nice spaces to be in practice, we, we're sort of burdened with low floor heights throughout the project. So these double height spaces provide some kind of relief from that. And especially as we're renovating Crossland Tower, we've found, and a colleague of mine said, which has stuck with me ever since, that vertical volume is the currency of this project. And so we tried to use the model of these existing reading rooms and draw them through Crossland Tower to create these nodes throughout that building that provide some relief for the low floor to floor heights that exist.
Yeah.
So here they are. Both at the ground level where we were talking about earlier and up through the building all the way to the top. These higher spaces are sort of the network that connects the project together.
Yeah, so we were kind of able to liberate this building, which was just a series of flat floor plates, by selectively removing just a few sections of floor and create these really nice multiple heights, multiple story spaces. Here's another view kind of looking back the other way. So here's one, the New Books Reading Room. This is one of those spaces you can see on the right-hand side outside the elevators. That was the level of the existing ceiling, and now it's this very nice northern with light from the north, diffuse light, and a very nice space. This is a sci-fi reading room. This is one of the more fun spaces in the library. Tech has an interesting collection for science fiction. Jeremy, you want to talk about kind of some of the concepts for how this space was organized?
Well, as you can see, some of the cues that the architecture of this space has are inspired by the kind of zoomy, futuristic,
That's right.
pulp covers kind of aesthetic. So the womb chairs in the background, or not the womb chairs, the globe chairs in the background, kind of geometry of these bookshelves. And the idea, was that there are several distinct collections in the library of physical works. There are the rare books, which are down in the archives, but then there are these collections, in particular sci-fi, that Tech has a lot of pride in. And so they wanted to really showcase this collection. It's right at the entry, one of the entries to Crossland Tower, and it's sort of, as you can see, suspended almost above the reading room that we were just looking at below, with sort of a constellation of chandelier stars looking out there.
That's a cool space. Here are the renovated Price Gilbert reading rooms. These are the original ones that we were talking about being the currency of the project. These were the original long life, loose fit spaces that have been, their performance has been improved. We have a new high performance curtain wall that remains, has a lot of fidelity to the original historic design. The space is essentially kept intact, but with all new finishes and other sorts of technology improvements and accessibility improvements. We're very proud of how this space turned out. It's still the sort of calling card of the library to this day. And then on the 7th floor, Jeremy, you talked about the most quiet space kind of in the whole library.
And this space existed. That's the amazing thing about most of the places we've looked at in here so far, is that this space existed. It was here before, but it was surrounded by brick. There were just little lancet windows here and there offering a glimpse of what's outside. So we opened this up, and that sort of philosophical approach of taking something that's introverted and making it extroverted. Now it's opened up to the city, to the world around, and is a pretty popular space.
Absolutely. That view was, like Jeremy said, that view was there for a boardroom, but students weren't allowed to go there. Not very many people knew about it because they had these tiny little windows, and the rest of the floor was mechanical and storage space, which is a real shame because, as you can see, the views are as good as any in the city, frankly. They're really very nice. This is a very popular space with the students. You can see more of those views. So when we talk about other kind of spaces for collaboration, one of the most unique program areas in the whole library is the Scholars Event Network. And Jeremy, I have a rendering here. I've also got some photographs behind it. You want to talk about a little bit about what the Scholars Event Network is?
Well, originally this was, when we talk about currency of these vertical spaces, this is one that was given to us. This is one that existed in the building already, and it existed because it was the original entry to Bryce Gilbert. Over time, it had become kind of a side room where meetings were held, and it was sort of a display or exhibit area. But part of the point of this project was to really make use of this existing double height space. So what happens here is that, and we talked about it being for a variety of uses and set up in a variety of ways. It's a lecture, it's a dissertation defense, it's a presentation, it's some scholarly event that folks can observe both down on the floor, the flat floor of this room, and up above in this gallery that kind of encircles it on two sides.
Yeah. Then here are some photographs of it completed. You see the floor area, the double height space, the tall windows, and the balcony overlook. This kind of forms a whole, this is one component of a complex of exhibition space, seminar space, this big sort of almost theatrical space, all which allows Georgia Tech to host events here at the library where original scholarship can be presented, it can be recorded, it can be post-produced, and then it can be cataloged in the library and sent back up to the cloud for other scholars to create more scholarly work. It's like the entire cycle of scholarship gets executed in this type of space. It's really exciting. Here's another space, the Innovation and Ideation Atrium. This is in Carlson Tower, one of the places where we removed a few levels of floor to create this vertical space. This is really more of a studio type environment where generating ideas and innovative concepts in a sort of designy sort of sense is the idea. Anybody that ever went to design school or architecture school recognizes what this space is for. And then there are multiple multimedia zones throughout, mainly on the third level. It was interesting, Jeremy, the way the concept for the program evolved to sort of give different levels of the library different personalities. And this third level definitely has that.
It does, yeah. The third level was very tech oriented. So level 2, the level below, the bottom level of the Innovatrium space that we were just looking at, is very dirty and tactical or tactile, and and so then the third level it becomes a very high tech area. Lots of workstations. This is where in blue the IT department lives, so that they're close to the work that they do with the students. So this is your multimedia level.
Yep. And then the level above that includes the teaching studio suite. And for those who saw last month's webcast, we talked, the entire episode was about that suite. And it's a really exciting program area, which we won't go into super detail about here, but it's where teachers can learn how to use multimedia and digital tools to use in their classroom. Just very timely here in the COVID era where teachers are having to teach using, webinars and Zoom and things like that. So this is where they learn how to use those tools inside the library in a safe space that's just for teachers, and they can do it without feeling self-conscious around their students. And then the graduate student community, Jeremy, I know that we kind of wanted to give some space over to them as well.
We did, yeah. That was one of the things we heard from way early on, is that the graduate students didn't really have a place. Clough was built for undergrad students, and it was customized to their needs. In this case, graduate students have a different set of needs. So providing a place for them that was in a nice area of the building, pretty high up, as you can see, and south facing, a place for them to feel a sense of fellowship and to work on projects together and to have a space of their own. That's what this is.
Yeah, it's kind of a callback to the, originally this building, Crosland Tower, was called the Graduate Annex or something like that. It's always had sort of a graduate student flavor about it. Here's some of the spaces for that group. And then we had normal collaboration type rooms, and these are kind of sprinkled strategically throughout both buildings. And we tried to give them sort of visual access to multiple other spaces and not just be these little pods of space there. I know these are very popular. I always see these rooms filled every time I'm over there, even today. And then the largest meeting room we have is the 7th floor. It's not a boardroom. It's just a large conference room, but it really has a boardroom sort of formal feel about it. Jeremy, this is one of those spaces, again, that this is on the same level as the 7th floor reading room we were talking about, that really liberated an underused area on the building.
Yeah, absolutely. I can't get enough of this room. Every time I'm there, I want to go here, and I want to go on the 2 flanking outdoor terraces, which you see one of them off to the left-hand side of this image. There are 2, one on either side, where you can get out. You're high up, and you can really take in the view of the surrounding area.
Yeah, it's a like Jeremy said, there it is right there. They're really nice, unbelievably nice spaces. You can see the tech tower, and you kind of get an 180-degree skyline view on each side. So you kind of get a 360 experience almost up there.
The one missing piece from that image are solar panel sunshades, which will occupy the trellis that you see there.
That's right. We're still waiting to get those installed. God willing. Also have some quiet spaces. Jeremy, you mentioned earlier the Special Collections Reading Room. Here's a picture of that space. You want to talk about that?
Sorry, you broke up a little bit. So Special Collections Reading Room is this it's a jewel of a space. It houses very rare works, and it's a place for people to conduct scholarship that's very serious. So what happens is we have this archives room down in the basement. You can request a piece of material from the archives. They bring it up, kind of white glove service, into this room, which is richly appointed in walnut and dark cork flooring, comfortable seats, broad tables, and you can really dig in and do some good work here. It's quiet, and yet it has a connection to its surroundings. You see in the background, there's a connection down to the tiered risers that we were looking at earlier. And behind us is a connection to the New Books Reading Room, that long linear space with the chandelier in it. So it's sort of suspended between these 2 volumes, and it's kind of a jewel of its own.
Absolutely. And the users have really embraced the sort of archive connection to this. You see the vitrine on the right. It's got lots of historic artifacts in it, one of which is the original rendering of Crosland Tower itself. So the building that this space sits in is the rather ungainly brick building in that rendering on the on the easel, the vitrine. Sorry, didn't mean to say that out loud. Okay. We also have in various places we've sort of captured spaces for individual study by providing different categories of seating and different ways of basically finding one spot in the library. There are lots of different opportunities for that kind of thing to happen. One of the most popular spaces for the last 60 years in the Price Gilbert building has been this continuous worktop that overlooks the 2-story reading rooms. This is a photograph from when construction was still underway. But you can see here these individual spots along that continuous counter is always filled with students who'd like to sit in this place and look out towards the Grove. Here's a view kind of stepping back from that and looking back toward that counter. You can see this is a wintertime shot, but in the summer, you're looking essentially into a beautiful canopy of trees. It's really a really nice place to do quiet study. Jeremy, we also tried to have a diversity of seating types in the library to allow for people, again, to kind of find their home and find their spot. And these are some examples of that. So that's kind of an overview of all of these quiet and not so quiet spaces. I think Jeremy and I were hopefully there will be some questions. Garrett, can you lead us through that?
Yeah, we've got some things to discuss here. So to start, the first question is, what is the most interesting thing you've learned over the course of this project for either of you?
Jeremy, you want to take that one first?
Well, let's see here now. The project went on for 7 years. I was a young lad when it started. So I mean, obviously a lot has transpired since then. What I like about a project like this is that you have an opportunity to immerse yourself in what somebody else does all day and learn from that. And I really enjoyed, and I know Brian, you did too, our contact and our connection with the librarians themselves. Who are these people? What is the work of a librarian these days? Mm-hmm. It was interesting to find out.
Completely
so I learned a lot
agree.
from them.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. It was, so for me, that because Georgia Tech had built this library services center in collaboration with Emory University off campus, they built a facility to house the books in a protected environment, extending the life of the collection, protecting the collection, and also creating space for people in the library, which Georgia Tech's library, in comparison to its peer institutions, was woefully underseated. There were not nearly enough seats in our libraries, in the Georgia Tech library system for the population that they have on campus. So given that dynamic, what rose to the top for me in a way that I didn't expect, and what I learned is similar to what Jeremy is saying, is that all of the activities that librarians have always done and have always been part of what they had to do really came to the fore when the books were kind of removed, and it was really about the librarians providing those services as the highlighted element. And it was a surprise to me how varied and how in-depth and how much broad expertise there is in that building when all is said and done. It's really impressive.
That's really interesting. I think the parallel point hearing you guys discuss this morning is relative to not just understanding the user group and how they're going to occupy the space and how it can work best for them, but also to understand the existing design. And I heard you both talk to the point that often we think of a renovation project or a substantial transformation project like this as something that you're amending all of the things that need correction. But we've talked a lot about this morning about finding the things that are working well and highlighting those or extending those into the new design. And so it's interesting, kind of, like I said, in parallel to your point about understanding the using group, it's also putting yourselves in the shoes of the original designer to understand what they were thinking, why it works the way it does, and how to sort of surgically intervene.
Well, for sure. So Jeremy and I have very different experiences with those existing buildings coming into it, but I think we kind of very quickly came to similar conclusions about them. And, I went to Georgia Tech as a student, and I've admired that Price Gilbert building in particular since I was an architecture student. And it is one of the finest examples of that mid-century modernist international style architecture in the city of Atlanta. And it's always been a building that I've had a lot of respect for. And I was interested to see, when we started working with BNIM and with Jeremy and Steve and all the folks on the team, what their approach to that building would be, because they're kind of coming at it, cold and completely differently. And I'll let Jeremy speak for himself about how they felt about it, but we were happy to know that we were we had a similar desire to approach the project with them. So Jeremy, you want to share about that?
Well, sure. From a personal standpoint, I have a background in historic preservation. In addition to architecture, I worked in the Bay Area as a historic preservationist for a few years, and I was very excited to work on the Price Gilbert building because it is sort of a very instructive mid-century modern building. And so our approach for that was to take what's working well and keep it and freshen things up, basically. Keep the building more or less intact, but renew it. And then as it concerns Crossland Tower, to take the lessons that Price Gilbert teaches us and apply them to Crossland Tower. I can think of a very literal example. Price Gilbert is a rectangle building. It has an opaque west facade, an opaque east facade, and transparent north and south. That's great. From a solar orientation standpoint and a heat gain standpoint, that's what you want. So we apply that directly to Carlson Tower. If you look at that building, it's opaque, and transparent on the north and south. That's a very simple example, but that's just kind of a way of reading the building that we have, taking its lessons and applying it to an adjacent building so that they kind of read together, so they work together better.
That's well said. You know, and Garrett, the feedback we get from people that see the facility talk about how transformational the project was, and the irony is that transformation was created by paying close attention to what was already there and working with it. And that's how the transformation was not about negating things. It was about really taking away like Jeremy said, taking away what wasn't working and enhancing the parts that were.
So relative to those points, then, now that construction is complete and the building's begun being occupied, were you surprised by anything in the design, either of you? Starting with Jeremy.
Well, I think this happens on every project I do, where I think that it's going to be bigger than it ends up being. When you stand in this place, you're like, oh, that's what it is. Interesting. I don't know if anybody else has that experience, but I certainly do. The thing that's, I don't know if this is a direct answer to the question, but I feel like this is a hard building to photograph on the inside. Because of the way we designed it, it is a network of spaces. It's not a feature element or a singular gesture, architectural gesture. It is really highly functional, integrated network of spaces. So in photography, you can kind of capture a bit here, a bit there, but you can't really experience how it functions without being inside the building and wandering around and seeing how the spaces relate to each other. So maybe not surprising, maybe not answering your question, but.
Well, that's really interesting. In some ways, you're kind of advocating for the representation of this through media to be through a format more like film, and to describe that sort of le marché that you have to be and walk through and do sort of the procession to experience. So that's a really interesting point about the project, and makes a lot of sense seeing the diagrams that you guys presented today that show, that really highlight not just the superhighway, but all of the other spaces in the upper levels as well. So no, I think that makes sense. What about you, Brian? Anything that you were kind of surprised by now that it's completed?
I was so we paid a lot of attention in working on the envelope of the building, curtain walls, shade devices, all those kinds of things, and in particular on Price Gilbert, because we completely reinstalled curtain walls in those buildings because there was no thermal break, there was no insulating glass in a lot of places, and we tried to. This building is a remarkably sustainable building. We've doubled the population and reduced the energy consumption by 60%. That's a ludicrous improvement of performance, and we had to operate on the glazing systems to make that happen. And we did some very subtle things trying to create the sort of fidelity with, in the case of Price Gilbert, its original design intent by PM Heffernan, and in the case of Carlson Tower, to do something different but compatible. And I was actually surprised at how important those little things were, and I'm pleased with how they came out. Yeah, they turned out to be really sort of signature aspects of it to me. Yeah.
Well, I know we've talked a lot about collaboration today, and the movement away from sort of a quiet space to a more active space. Are there things specifically within the design that address that additional noise?
The additional noise of the active space?
Yes, sir. So how was that accommodated within the design?
Well, I think the stratification of those spaces is really important as kind of a passive way of controlling noise. Just literally keeping the active levels on a separate plane than the quiet levels kind of does your job for you. In areas that wanted to be really, really quiet, We took, sort of specialized measures to control the acoustics in those rooms. So, for example, the recording studios have to be incredibly quiet. So they're up on a platform. They have double walls surrounding them. They have this really interesting ceiling system. It's kind of on one end of the spectrum. At the Grove level, where you have a super highway, very active, and lots of foot traffic, it's all hard surfaces, and it kind of supports the material choices support the noise level of that space too.
Yeah, I 100% agree with what Jeremy's saying. Also, one sort of fortunate historical and design and acoustic win was that the original Price Gilbert reading rooms had cork flooring, and a lot of those had been replaced with carpet or other materials over the years, but there were places where it still existed, and we kind of reintroduced it in ways that were similar to its original kind of implementation, and that's a pretty good sound absorbing material. That was just one kind of very specific way that was fortunate, I think. We use very conventional though assemblies in this building. This building is about ideas and how things work together more than it's about, crazy fancy materials. I mean, we have carpet, cork, wood, acoustical ceilings, gypsum board. I mean, those are really, that's the palette for the building. It's very straightforward, and we tried to use those things as intelligently as we could to make sure that the money went as far as it could go. We did not have to sacrifice program areas to install things we needed to install.
Right.
Great. Well, and then considering that today's discussion has been primarily focused on collaboration and not necessarily the collection, in that sense, are there ideas within what is a research library at Georgia Tech that apply to more conventional libraries? Are they relevant there as well?
I think absolutely. And libraries in general are being asked to do more and more and more for the communities they serve. They are not just a storehouse for books. Public libraries especially are meeting places. They're places for people to use a computer or check out a gadget. They're just really sort of an old-fashioned, in a way, general purpose community resource. And so this idea of collaborative spaces is entirely appropriate in a venue where the library is serving its community.
Yeah, I agree. There was a conference that was hosted by the library last year, and I'm blanking on the name of the keynote speaker. He had the book last year, Palaces of the People. It's about libraries. If y'all, I don't remember the author's name. I apologize. I can't remember that. But he told the story of doing a design studio with a Northeastern University architecture program in which they had given the students a lot of free rein to come up with their own program to do a really important kind of capstone type project. And this one student had come in and said, I have this idea for this institution, and it's open to the public and it's free, and no one has to pay anything, and it provides services that helps people with technology needs and information about news, current events, other types of information, and it's completely democratic and open to everybody. And it's this new institution that I'm going to design this building for. And the person who is the author said, it sounds an awful lot like you're describing a library, and it really is that. And Jeremy's right. It's these. I think individual components of this library have a home in any kind of library, no matter how much of the collection remains in the building or not. I think these are things that our society has to do, and I think our libraries probably always reflect what the society needs and what the students need and what the researchers need.
Okay, well, that's a great spot to end on. I'll just ask relative to each of your responses to that question, and even in the title of the book by Eric Kleinenberg, Palaces for the People.
That's it.
Is it still appropriate to call these facilities libraries?
For sure. If the Library of Alexandria was a library, this is a library.
I second that.
All right. Well, thank you guys both so much, Jeremy Kahm and Brian Tanner this morning. This has been great. So for those viewing later today, you will receive an email that will allow you to download today's presentation and the option to take a short survey. We appreciate your feedback and we'll be glad to answer any future questions you may have. We hope that you'll join us for the next discussion. It's going to be on an evolutionary theory of facilities, or making sure that a proposed design is optimized to accommodate change with minimal disruption. Also, recordings of the previous webinars within this series are available. Please check those out on our website. And thanks again for joining, and we look forward to talking with you again soon.
Good to see you, Jeremy.
Nice to see you too, Brian. You have fun. Everybody have a great weekend. Happy Friday.
Bye.